I'm really excited for next year's Glastonbury, where they have Al Murray, the pub landlord, headlining at the Pyramid stage, supported by Richard Kemp telling war stories.
Roy Chubby Brown on the main stage.
All of it sponsored by James Dyson. Selling you on the benefits of anti-woke Britain. He can't sell you on Brexit anymore.
I'm a moderate liberal centrist, and what that means is we need to restore civility to Glastonbury by force by sending in the army to just shoot at will, basically.
Win Marshall, I am 27-year-old conservative. My music festival yearns for freedom.
Yeah.
I went to Glastonbury in my big blue rosette and my straw boater, and everyone laughed at me. Please drop a JDAM directly on the chill out tent.
Yeah, they're trying to get Gang of Four back together despite Andy Gill being dead because they want them to perform He'd Send In the Army, not realizing the point of the song.
I love a man in uniform.
I think it's just there's something I've learned about good classical liberal politics, right? I mean classical liberal, the liberalism of Locke and Mill and Hobbes, these guys, the school guys, the guys you learn in school, classical liberals.
Of course, the nice, respectable kind of peaceable liberals, yeah.
Sure, don't read all of the chapters of them, but they're nice, respectable, peaceable liberals. And what I've learned is that if you're going to be a classical liberal in that tradition, if you found yourself sort of, horrified by everything the Soviet Union ever did, the most important thing is that you have government sign-off of every single piece of cultural production at all, in case it interferes with important foreign policy commitments.
Yeah, they're going to put everyone on the panel on Have I Got News for You. They're going to put like a shock collar on them just in case, they ever say anything that's slightly out of pocket. I mean, do you think that liberals ever kind of get together and sort of like put their head in their hands and go, oh, we're going to have to kill so many people? Or is it like, is the beauty of liberalism that it's always a surprise to them when they have to like bring the hammer down?
I obviously am getting to experience a little bit different because of just the place where I live now and the fact that there's like proportional representation and infinity weird parties and parties constantly merging and demerging. And so in even just our local governing council, the cantonal government, we have the radical liberal party, we have the social justice party, the centre party. There's also the real liberals, which aren't represented here, but they're a national party.
The continuity liberals, they're so named, of course, because they don't agree with the Good Friday Agreement.
Yeah, there's also the green liberals. And I'll give you an example of one of the things that they did here. Many people who speak French may have encountered a very popular kids cartoon starting from the late 90s onward called Titeuf. The guy who created Titeuf is Swiss. He's from Geneva, and he's obviously very wealthy now because it's like the world's most French language fucking sponsorship endorsed thing ever. He owns a house. He wants to sell it. It's like a villa house, not too far from where I live, in a relatively mostly built up neighborhood. And the Liberal Party is launching a referendum to determine basically to hold a plebiscite on whether or not this guy is allowed to sell his house.
This is small government. This is liberalism, Basically,
he bought a house and he wants to sell it and live elsewhere in the country. I mean, he's a citizen of this country. And he basically negotiated to sell it to the city so they could turn it into a museum, because otherwise it's just going to get bought by an insane foreign buyer and turned into the fucking compound full of Hennessy and 0% taxation cigarettes. And so the Liberal Party has decided this can't stand because the market has to determine the price of the house because the city is apparently paying too much. So basically everyone's going to have to vote, well, people who can vote, on whether or not cartoonist guy is allowed to sell his house. And to me, I find that there's something so in a way, because a lot of the structural problems of a country like the United Kingdom are less here, they basically can focus on the real problems of liberalism, which is this insane fixation that the market's got to decide and also that this cannot stand because of what we might describe as the principle of it. If you resolve to take the stupidest possible interpretation of something. And I feel what we've seen in Glastonbury with basically everyone being Glastonbury has to be, well, no, you can't nuke Glastonbury because they already said you were supposed to do that in 2017 to get rid of all the Corbyn followers. And now they're oh, no, actually suggesting violence in any way is bad.
Oh, the police are actually going to be investigating Bob Villain and Nick kneecap.
This is why people join the police, right? Is to go through old tweets and like old footage from Glastonbury to be like, is how much trouble can we make for this person?
Yeah.
I think the thing that makes me feel better about this is you look at an artist, whether it's Kneecap or Bob Dylan or whoever, right? You know, doing sort of like chants that are supportive of Palestine, and you look out at this like sea of Palestinian flags, and you think, what liberalism of the kind that wants to say, you know, this is like unacceptable to broadcast on the BBC, we have to have the police like investigate, we have to have the CPS prosecute this, is a kind of ideology that is now at war with not just what sort of like a large amount of the British public think, but basically with reality. And it's not for the first time. I thought the same thing with a lot of the trans stuff, where it's like you are trying to use all of the kind of repressive levers of the state that liberals are so fond of in a way that is just going to be ridiculous. There was a bit in The Guardian where what I'm going to do in air quotes, Home Office staff assigned to combating terrorism were briefing anonymously that banning Palestine action, prescribing them, was going to be like a nonsense, because you would have to prosecute so many people. It would just be, you know, completely beyond the kind of system that's currently set up to enforce that. And if you get to the point where the intelligence community is kind of briefing against you anonymously to be like, yeah, we just can't do that. This is the thing that you want is not possible because too many people support Palestine and obviously recognize a genocide when they see one, that I don't know where that leads other than to like complete kind of electoral oblivion for liberals. And that might be worse, but like it's not something that they're equipped to deal with at all.
Well, what we've sort of seen with like the right is that they've posed a solution to this, like recognizing that like, oh, there are too many people to sort of like use the carceral state to punish them. Yeah. So instead they've sort of become very fixated with like deportations and like mass deportations is sort of like the kind of number one, like the only policy the right really has, but like the obsession, the sort of some mimetic obsession. And it also like poses this challenge to liberals because, as you've mentioned, like, you know, liberals are sort of like their sort of fetishization of institutions and the sort of doubling down on that as they all sort of collapse under the state of like their own contradictions and just like the fact that they were all sort of farcical anyway. They're now having to sort of like on the one hand reckon with like a reality that is very far removed from their sort of like obsessions and their fixations, but also like dealing with like a challenger that is a lot more vicious and a lot more violent and believes in like the power of the state, but like believes only that like that the only way it sort of can function is to be punitive or as punitive as possible. And so they're like in a real pickle because it's sort of like, well, the sort of idea of like it, you know, these institutions kind of being like benevolent and we can sort of present it as being, we can present like state violence as sort of being like very rational and reasoned. Well, no one's really interested in that anymore.
It's the same thing on both sides of different kind of shrinking constituencies. Like there are, you know, like decreasing numbers of kind of like squishy liberals who want to kind of like punish you for your own good for being pro-Palestine. And then there are kind of, you know, decreasing numbers, despite what it sometimes feels like, of like right-wingers who want to punish you for their own pleasure for you being pro-Palestine. But as both of those constituencies shrink, they kind of concentrate and they demand more authoritarianism.
What they're demanding is the total destruction at this point of the what's left of the British creative sector, except for, it seems, the one guy from Blur.
Yeah, because basically it's the same thing as it ever was. And you can see this with a lot of the homophobia and a lot of the transphobia as well, is having decisively lost the culture and having lost what most people think.
Do you recall in 2017, there was a band called Captain Ska that had a song called Liar Liar about Theresa May, and the BBC banned it, but it was like, I think it got to number 4 on the UK singles chart because of people buying the digital single. And like, basically the BBC went out of its way to make sure that this didn't get played. I don't think it was ever played on the air except for on pirate radio, or if it did, it was definitely not in wide distribution. And it's like the song effectively was like, Theresa May is a liar and she sucks, which I mean, the idea that you can be like, okay, take that principle of people feel this way, but we're not going to let them hear it or express it. Fine, whatever. If you want to say the BBC has some standard of impartiality, we all know that's horseshit, but I understand how they can convince people that this is true. But then it's like, take a mass news news event and apply that same principle to it. Like, it's effectively being like giving the Captain Ska treatment to 9/11. You're like, no, it didn't fucking happen, and you're not allowed to talk about it. 9/11 will not be placing on the top singles charts in the UK this year. In fact, it won't place any year. It was not top events of the decade. It didn't happen. It's like you have this event that is like so undeniably horrible that is getting worse and worse, and like to the point where you're seeing like Mehdi Hassan's spin out magazine Zedio did a thing where they got an anonymous article by a guy who was a private security contractor hired from America to do the like Gaza aid, and he was just like, no, the Israelis are just using it as a pretext to kill everyone. And this is like basically a Blackwater guy being like, I'm fucking disgusted. It's that level of bad, but then it's like every lever of state power in the United Kingdom says you are not allowed to think that. It's illegal, it's anti-Semitic, and like regardless of your opinions of calling for violence, even if it's against a military target, I mean, we're real with you. Speaking as a formerly completely valid fucking target to get killed, I don't have anything bad to say. I don't disagree with the right to express that. And frankly, if you force me to pick a side, I'm going to pick fucking the Palestinian side, obviously. The idea that you can suppress that, you can use like, that's not allowed to be said, that's not allowed to be thought, it's against the law. We're going to use the same law that we sent the dude to prison for about fucking making fun of Captain Tom to go after like any band who expresses solidarity with Palestine. Like, I don't see that being sustainable. It's just so farcical.
It just isn't. It's the thing this is the thing that's going to like, it feels like the lever that's going to break off in your hand. You know? Like it feels like this is the thing that the British government has decided must at all costs, like even if it like completely ablates its own capacity to repress, right? Even if it like discredits the BBC, even if it makes like MI5 useless, like whatever it takes, this is the thing that is has to be, and it has to be. Israel can do whatever it wants forever. Fuck you.
They wore off the paint on the racism button, and also the lever of power is made out of 1970s Bakelite, and it hasn't survived the recent heat waves because they can't afford fucking aircon in the control center, so it's just snapping off.
But I think this is it. I think like the most cynical are sort of very aware of this. Like they're very like when I talk about the cynical, I sort of mean cynical. I mean, there's cynics everywhere, but like right-wing cynics definitely recognize that like what's happening like in Gaza, but also like the state response to that, and the sort of increasing use of authoritarianism is like number one proof that you can just do that if you want to, right? Like, and I'm not even sort of saying reform will do this, although like I wouldn't be surprised, but like there are lots of politicians across like the board who are very much looking at this and being like, oh, like we can use the state to sort of just like suppress people for like whatever we want under like these very sort of like, you don't even need to sort of explain the circumstances. They don't really even need to make sense, right? But you can just do that. You can just use it. And, and so I think there are some people who are very invested in like kind of pretending, I would say, or at least kind of like their sort of like belief in like, the integrity of Israel or whatever is not entirely sort of driven by a love for it or whatever. I think it is, part of it is very much like, oh, we need to sort of like preserve this at the moment, or at least sort of like let this kind of continue to derail, because eventually like in the right hands, aka my hands, like I can use it to sort of like, create the type of sort of country that I want to. And I think like
you're so right.
I think like people like Robert Jenrick are sort of like a good example of that, right?
Well, that's the shrinking wire thing, right? Is to be like, what Israel is doing now today is what I want to do in like 5-10 years time.
Remember, that's exactly what Richard Spencer said, and that's also what people like Tommy Robinson have at least alluded to, that the thing with the support for Israel isn't based on, in their case, it's not like the sort of Christian eschatology. It's here is a state governed explicitly on racial lines in which there is a supreme race who has rights and no one else does, and the state enforces that, with boots, guns, tear gas, bombs, etc. And we want that too. We want a white ethno state like Israel. Now, Israel's not like, it's not based on whiteness per se, but the same concept. It's pretty easy to transplant that. And yeah, I agree with you 100%. Like they have to support the idea it can do no wrong. Mostly, I think, like you were saying, Hussein, because it's like, that's how they would govern given the choice.
And, I think if we can segue as well into Zoran here, right?
Should probably introduce the podcast first.
Oh shit. Right. It's Trash Future. You know all about it.
Yeah.
You know what? The other day I was listening to I'm sorry to derail again. I was listening to like some podcasts on like Tortoise, like, or something like that. And they didn't introduce like the show. They didn't say, welcome to Tortoise, this is the name of the program, until half an hour into this hour-long podcast.
Hey, they're biting our thing.
Many such cases.
So don't feel too bad about it. I feel like, it is very much a trend now to sort of be like introduce it like almost just to the point where it nearly finishes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, hi everybody. It's Trash Feature. You know all about it.
Hi.
If you're listening to it, you know the stuff. If you're new to it, you'll figure it out. So I want to segue though into Zoran here as well, because what we are at the advanced stage of sort of some of these similar claims, right? We have been doing this for a while, and now the British state, as we've talked about, is perfectly willing to completely go to war against its university sector.
This is the thing. You can kind of generalize this to a kind of global theory of like outsourcing, right? Where if you remember, we read the Palestine Laboratory, right, on Left Unread, which kind of posits, among other things, that one of the things that Israel is useful to capital for is a kind of test bed, right, in that it has this kind of zone of occupation in which it can test new technologies and methods of repression and occupation and so on. I feel like in some ways Britain occupies the kind of media lens of that, of Britain is the kind of test bed for how can we make a nominal democracy's media as repressive as possible in a way that like excludes the left, right? Because anything that you're going to see targeted at Zoran was tried against Corbyn first. And like, this is the thing. I said this with some of the Bernie campaigns. The challenge for the American left is partially to see what happened here and why the left in this country has failed, and to go, well, like, this is part of a media ecosystem with a lot of particularly American money and American ideas flowing into it, but not exclusively, that has been able to structure itself very successfully thus far to completely shut down things that are, on the numbers, uncontroversial.
Well, it also always felt with Corbyn like the goal was whatever the excuse you needed, they would find a way to provide a kind of, speaking of liberals yet again, top cover to say, here is why this thing that is obviously, like you just said, November, uncontroversial, why it's not just wrong, but it's immoral to support it. Here's, even if it's completely confected, even if it's exaggerated, doesn't matter what it is. Here's the reason why it is actually immoral to even allow this kind of politics to exist. And that's obviously very transparent. We could see right through it at the time, but like, unfortunately, sometimes it's just a matter of creating a kind of critical mass of dumb bullshit, time wasting, concern troll excuses. And that I feel as though, that Britain is absolutely, Corbyn aside, absolutely the fucking, like the testing ground, the sort of Los Alamos, White Sands National Monument of that shit.
I read in a newsletter today the restaurant that put Los Alamos on the map, and I was like, I don't think it was that.
They had actually that's the British state's end goal, is they have to drop a specially concentrated fucking thing, to a kind of explosive that's going to turn just Jeremy Corbyn's allotment into trinitrite. All of his marrows are going to become trinitrite. They're going to become radioactive glass.
But I want to segue briefly into Zoran here, right, as well, because what's really, I say shocking, it's just, it's typical but depressing, is that a lot of the Democratic Party, people like Christian Gillibrand, are like, again, at a time when Donald Trump is like, I'm going to take away everybody's Medicaid. The only thing that the Democratic Party seems to be able to do is be like, Zoran should apologize for what he said about Jews.
Yeah.
He didn't say anything.
He didn't say anything. And I feel like all of the things trying to put words in his mouth, he's been basically treating the question both with contempt and also giving it a very, very considered and measured answer. He's extremely good at communicating. And I'm going to be honest with you, since Kirsten Gillibrand is technically my senator, wow, she has fallen off even worse than she was bad to begin with. It's like previously the less bad senator of New York, because Chuck Schumer's the other one. And it's nuts, man. I mean, this whole, like, they've just invented this fake quote about him saying globalize the intifada. It's just like, all right, guys, I feel as though this point has been made by so many people, and I'm absolutely plagiarizing, and I don't even know who from whom. But 2 months ago, it was like, we need a Joe Rogan from the left, someone who can energize young voters. Then Zoran Mamdani gets basically, like, the first time I think I've ever seen turnout for the 18 to 24 bracket higher than any other fucking bracket in an election. And they're like, kill this man, fucking turn him into ash, cast him into the ocean, turn him into trinitrite. Like, It's wild to me.
It's insane because it's like, no, we want someone who will excite people, but with bad ideas because they think everyone's fucking stupid. They think everyone is a moron.
Get excited about Pete Buttigieg. Get excited about, what is it, Alyssa Slotkin being like poverty. I learned in the CIA that poverty is a national security threat or whatever.
Yeah, we're going to have to deploy an AI-enabled drone to destroy poverty. Wait, no. I don't like what the drone is targeting. It should target something else. It should make it target the flat screen TV store. Fuck.
Yeah, poverty is a national security issue because that's how I managed to convince all these sources I ran who just stopped talking to me for some reason. Why did they ghost me? It's really unfair the way people talk to each other online these days.
Call out post about a bunch of mid-level Chinese officials. Yeah.
The Tsarnaev brothers, I just disagree with their conduct on Twitter. So
he was a low stress kind of guy. I don't know what the problem was.
Yeah, the Democratic Party said, "Oh, we need a Joe Rogan of the left," and there's a low stress kind of guy who's currently sitting in prison right now.
I'm sorry, I have to. I'm a stress free kind of guy.
Excuse me.
Yeah. All right. We have a bunch of stuff to talk about today. A bunch more stuff to talk about today. November, you actually were like, can we talk about the fact that they keep on automating the jobs of warfighters and precious operators and fight warriors?
Yes. Yeah. As the Trash Future war nerds, as the Alyssa Slotkin of the podcast, who was like, I consider podcasts to be a national defense issue. I saw this long article and I was like, this is kind of perfect for us because it is a way in which international relations and tech and specifically startups are making everything much worse and also maybe ensuring that the way in which we get killed in the future is going to be that much more horrifying.
So many Israeli startups. I looked into a bunch of them. There's so many. Before we get to that, I want to do one quick piece of news, which is this is one of these other ones that was sent to me 1 trillion times. And I'm very pleased. I was happy with everyone who sent it to me 1 trillion times. Basically, this is the guy who started the company, Jane Street, one of the 4 founders of like this high frequency mathematician trading firm on Wall Street. Former employer Sam Bankman-Fried before he went to go start FTX, and now I believe runs a profitable cigarette trading organization. Or sorry, not cigarettes because they're not allowed anymore. Packets of mackerel, 1 ounce packets of mackerel trading organization. So that guy, Robert Graneri, it has turned out that he accidentally funded a coup in South Sudan.
Oh, okay. I mean, I think it's important for us to keep up with the various like coups that there are in the world. And this is definitely one of the types of coups that there is.
Here's the difference, right? Mark Thatcher wanted to be a big dog, right? Mm-hmm. He wanted to be a big dog. He wanted to be able to like be a kind of power behind the throne in Equatorial Guinea. Robert Graneri is so gormless that I genuinely believe he did this by mistake, which is really amusing.
I on the sort of sweeping spectrum of coups from Mark Thatcher to the attempted Venezuelan coup, which ended with a bunch of like ex-Green Berets getting like face down on the street in Venezuela while one of them pissed themselves and the piss would like roll downhill towards his own face. Where's this? Is this closer to that?
So basically, much like the Equatorial Guinea coup, no boot ever touched ground in the country that was supposed to be couped. However, like the Silvercorp coup, it was stopped very easily before anyone could do much of anything because everyone involved seemed to be kind of stupid. However, the funny thing is that the 2 guys who were doing this, one of them was a Harvard fellow and World Bank economist and his, I believe, brother, who wanted to buy AK-47 Stinger missiles and grenades to topple the South Sudan government.
How do you know you're doing a coup with someone who went to Harvard? Don't worry, they'll tell you. You're like in a warehouse trying to buy Stinger missiles, and he's like, "Oh yeah, so when I was at Harvard, it doesn't even really relate to anything he's saying. He just likes to get it in there."
First, we should seize the newspaper. We called that the Harvard Crimson, where I went to university.
Oh, where'd you go to university?
I have no idea. Look, I don't remember anything. So Jane Street co-founder Robert Graneri admits he did put up the money for the coup, saying he was duped. This emerges from the U.S. prosecution of Peter Ajak, the Harvard fellow who was accused last year of scheming to install himself as the president of South Sudan. Graneri's lawyer said in a statement, Grenari is a longtime supporter of human rights causes. In this case, the person Rob thought was a human rights activist defrauded him and lied about his intentions. I am a human rights...
Why would a human rights activist need so many Stinger missiles? Is my question.
Protect human rights, obviously.
This question last asked by like the CIA Inspector General in like 1985.
This question last asked by the CIA Inspector General in 1985 before he burst out laughing.
Yeah. Visibly doing jerking off motion. Why would a human rights organization need this many Stinger missiles?
Oh yeah, well, why does the CIA director need a spinning bow tie?
Yeah, that's also what the what baggage security people were asking themselves at Heathrow when MI5 took that guy to fucking get checked in for his flight to Libya.
Hey, it's the wacky security services. Yes, it's the tier of operator above the Pennsylvania Secret Service.
Yeah, I've thought for a long time that podcasts have kind of robbed the intelligence community of its wackiest potential guys. We could be doing like Operation Mincemeat shit right now, but instead we're doing this, and I think that's a great shame.
We could be the Office cut-ups.
Yeah, basically.
You wouldn't. That's the problem, is that you can't have because of a variety of things, but podcasts primarily. Gus Avocados wouldn't actually become a CIA agent anymore. He would just try to be the next Joe Rogan, the Joe Rogan of the not left, I presume.
Gus Avocados would have made a great Bill Simmons. Like, I would have loved to listen to him talk about basketball. But sorry, Grenari is a longtime supporter of human rights causes, as I said. Federal prosecutors in Arizona, I don't think they're related, there's friends, charged Peter Ajak and Abraham Keach with conspiring to illegally export arms to their home country, but both pleaded not guilty. While prosecutors haven't said where the defendants obtained several $1 million for an attempt to buy military-grade weaponry, Ajak's lawyers pointed to Grenari in a recent filing, saying he was vital to the plan. The lawyers accused authorities of selectively prosecuting 2 black men, even though the support came from Grenari and Gary Kasparov.
What?
Sick.
POC, person of chess.
Yeah. Kasparov can reasonably say that any law in America derived from any law in England doesn't apply to him because all of history before 1500 was invented by the Vatican.
Yeah, that's true. A lot of work.
I will say, I know that Gary Kasparov was insane, that he was on some very, very strange politics, but I didn't realize that this is how it manifested.
It's this and transphobia, which happens only all the time, weirdly.
Despite Jane Street's ascent in the industry, Grenari kept a low profile. Well, I guess until now. Until this very moment. The firm's success has allowed Grenari to pour money into other ventures and causes. And I love what he's supported. Basically, he'll support any cause Gary Kasparov tells him to. So he just channels money into Gary Kasparov-backed causes.
I would love to have a pet rich guy. Are you kidding me? Like, to be honest, I even get like using him to do a coup. Like if I had a pet billionaire, I would be like, all right, what's the country I want to coup most? Lowest stakes? Let's go.
Yeah,
absolutely. New government in Aruba by the end of the week.
Yeah, we're going to install those 2 strange twins as the joint heads of state of Aruba. It's going to declare independence from the Netherlands. The Da Vinci boys are going to be in charge now. So he also, in addition to funneling money that causes Kasparov jetbacks around the globe, he also helped build a casino resort in Mississippi and was the largest backer of Nikki Haley.
Just muscle confusion.
Yeah. So basically, Ajak was a child soldier in Sudan in the 90s, resettled in the U.S., studied at the Harvard Kennedy School, returned to Sudan as a World Bank economist, and then was an opposition activist who sought asylum in the U.S.
This is weirdly like a Metal Gear Solid character backstory here.
Totally. Yeah, all of his weapons are DNA coded to him. Attorneys for both men have signaled in court that their defense is going to be that U.S. officials actually supported the plan, whereas prosecutors say that no, the State Department said in October 2023 that it wouldn't fund plans for non-democratic regime change. So the 2 brothers decided to go ahead anyway, but with private backing. So it's like they if they just waited like a little bit. That they would have done that anyway.
Coups, it's all about timing.
Yeah. So the 2 were arrested. This is the last detail of this. Then we're going to go on to the drones. They were arrested while inspecting all of the weapons that they bought, which they kept in a warehouse in Phoenix.
Cool.
They were just basically standing in a big room marked coup evidence. Anyway. All right. Let's talk drones because they have been. There is basically. We are in the midst of, in my view, genuinely an escalatory spiral right now.
And not just that, but also a kind of generational change in warfare.
Yeah.
Because thanks to Russia, now there are 2 test beds for military technologies, Palestine and also Ukraine.
Yeah.
So you get one that is by force and one that is sort of by choice. And you can test different things there because Ukraine needs a lot of stuff to fight the Russians with. And also, there's a key detail about this. Ukraine, as part of the kind of like westernization, modernization thing, was always very, very keen, like various Ukrainian politicians are very, very keen on the idea of being a startup nation, right? And this was one of the big talking points with the EU specifically, was to be like, we can do all of the like innovative startup stuff, but we can do it cheaper because we've got Moxie, we've got Get Up and Go, and you don't have to pay us as much. And so now that the war has been going on for this long, that has turned very quickly into militarized startup nation, which is one of the worst things I can imagine, and the results are predictable.
Yeah. A place where very quickly proliferation of death-dealing technologies will happen.
Yeah. And I sympathize because what else are you supposed to do? But it's the sort of like downstream consequences of this we do not know yet.
Yeah. What we're talking about specifically, the arms race we're talking about specifically, is an arms race around autonomy. That is to say, a drone that is able to move to an area, select a target, and do something to it, whether that's follow it, kill it, whatever else, without human intervention. At the moment, so this is a good definition. As the AI-enabled drones in Ukraine span cheap consumer drones embedded with a chip and software based on open source AI and constructed in like people's garages, to sophisticated consumer models backed by companies like Anduril or Shield AI, but the basic principle is the same. In the simplest definition, an AI-enabled drone is one where certain core functionalities have been replaced by AI, taking over from a human always having to have control over it. And this, by the way, is like from one of the executives of that company. Like all of these interviews are always ads, always.
Of course, yeah. Ads and kind of like wish fulfillment.
Yeah. And the difference between this and something that auto retargets artillery is that you just launch the drone, you tell it what kind of thing you want it to kill, and then it and other drones around it, at least according to the claims that are being made, will then autonomously go and do that.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned the kind of claim making here, because I think that's a key part of this. Is the claim is that these are already like extant and working, or at least working well enough to be used, but because of the war and also because of the kind of like secrecy inherent to this stuff, and also because it's sort of like beneficial for any business selling these to kind of try and obscure it if they don't work as well as they're claiming to. We don't know. Right. This is not something that you have a lot of like clear evidence about, at least not in public.
One of the things I'd point out, too, is that, obviously what this sounds like is like a, take to, the 8th, 10th power, the same kind of concept behind something that's like a heat seeking missile, if that makes sense. Like basically it's not quite autonomous targeting, but, if it works and it follows a certain thing, looks for a heat signature and more or less chases it. And you could see this, but like getting far more complex with these technologies having developed and miniaturized and become way, way cheaper to produce because of consumer products and things like that. But the thing that's weird about it for me, I guess the thing that immediately came to mind when you were describing this, and I was having to kind of visualize it, is that any kind of fail safe to stop a thing like this from going really, really off target and fucking things up and just being an absolute nightmare is immediately a thing that would be weaponized, in order to try to defeat it by, by the adversary. Like in the sense of, okay, some of the early drones they were testing out at like small levels in the US military, if you basically sent the same frequency radio signal to that thing as what it was transmitting on, it would lose signal, just fall out of the sky. Right. Now that's an obvious weakness. That's stuff that's no longer, those things aren't fielded anymore. They don't exist anymore, so on and so forth. But like, that's the kind of thing, like if you have a failsafe, well, if these things are autonomous and obviously you can't publicize and probably can't even really add in very many kinds of failsafes in this regard, like you are creating a thing where you're just sort of like, oh, well, I'm going to offload the consequences to the computer. And I don't know, man, I'm weirded out by that idea, because I think that in the kind of situation we're describing here, like, these are even in Russia and Ukraine, certainly in Palestine, the area that would be considered the sort of front line and or combat zone is not far at all from civilian areas. And I think that it plays into this recent trend of just worsening of like, oh yeah, well, whatever, fucking civilian casualties don't matter. Because that definitely seems to be the mentality that has like emerged out of this century so far.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel very much kind of like precursor to the First World War vibes. We're litigating what like war is going to look like for the rest of the century and what the kind of baseline expectations for that are. And because it's coming about through like sort of front lines that are like in Ukraine that are kind of like static for a long time, and you reach this kind of stalemate, particularly here we're talking about like electronic warfare, right? About like jamming different drones and then sort of like trying to defeat that by having drones that are like trailing a really long like fiber optic cable to a drone that just has an AI in it and it has no like kind of external guidance. And it's kind of both sides trying to solve that problem simultaneously and kind of innovate technologically there is going to lead to, much like, you know, changes in the First World War against some of the same problems led to, you know, some of the rest of the horrors of the rest of the 20th century. And so, yeah, this is just one to be accounted amongst them. And this is also something that the Russians are doing for the same reasons. And so I don't want to suggest that it's something specifically Ukrainian. It's just this is the way that things have shaken out, that it kind of has necessitated this like extremely dangerous and irresponsible development of new weapon systems.
Whenever I think about stuff like this, you know, you think about, well, what's the force multiplier here, right? In the First World War, something like shells filled with mustard gas are a huge force multiplier, because suddenly, you know, one shell doesn't just kill the people it explodes on, or if you're wounded, you don't come back to the front a little while later, you're fucking gone, right? That's a force multiplier for artillery.
Well, I think that for the First World War, I mean, the sort of official interpretation of events from is that like there were huge advances in mobility, and certainly there were huge advances in weaponry that lent themselves to defensive warfare, but like the things to overcome those for offensive warfare like didn't. Yeah. They developed sort of by necessity sometime from about 1914 to about 1917, you know what I mean? Yeah. And so like these kinds of things, you can see that we've already had UAVs for a long time, but they were things that were enormously expensive and required, you know, trained people to pilot one of them, and they still weren't always their success rate was quite marginal in a lot of ways. And so you can understand the idea of like, oh, make it autonomous, make it like massively miniaturized, make it all whatever. But in a very breezy, almost like, you know, ad copy taken straight from a press release statement have been like, oh yeah, we've gotten these things that are meant to you know, effectively cause mass casualty events. They destroy military vehicles, large amounts of explosives or munitions, so on, and we're going to make them completely autonomous.
Yeah, and we taught the robots to kill. This will be fine. Yeah, and not only will this be fine, but because this is the kind of like, you know, thing that things will now regress to, the new baseline. This is now, it's going to trickle down, and eventually that's like every human conflict is going to involve like your autonomous drones.
Yeah,
or whatever.
These guys all read Stanislaw Lem's The Invincible, but they read the AI summary of it. They're like, oh, this swarm of sentient kill machines is really good.
Well, it's that in every case, right? The incentives on the actors in these conflicts, especially Russia and Ukraine, is more and more autonomy, because you have a shortage of manpower and material. And it's like the more autonomy you can push into these things, then the slightly more advantage you'll have. But that's also the case. Like, it's not just those guys. Also, it's like the U.S. Army is racing to develop all this stuff as well, especially through contractors and like, you know, Palantir and Anduril and other such organizations, where the incentive is everyone is trying to have the least amount of human control possible, because that is where you get, according to this logic, I'd see if it bears out, the greatest combat advantage. So inevitably, because we're on this escalation path and everybody involved has agreed this is good, if we put any guideline, if we try to curb this, our adversaries will not curb this and inevitably beat us. I don't really see how we don't end up in a place where sort of entirely autonomous drone swarms kill sort of someone who was, I don't know, described by a prompt engineer.
Yeah, but there's another aspect to this, right? Which is how much of that is kind of wish fulfillment for some of the people involved. There's a quote in this article that I sent you, Riley, from the CEO of one of these like Ukrainian drone startups, who's like, oh yeah, airport security is like basically like over, because it's, you know, it's just like last generation stuff. The future now is, why wouldn't anyone, when this kind of gets out, because it's like easy to do, why wouldn't any terrorist group just kind of send like, some swarm of drones at an airport, right? And people aren't going to notice that until after drone 9/11 happens, right? And I don't necessarily rule out the prospect of drone 9/11, but we should say that the person saying that is a drone salesman, right? That's an articulation of like, my thing is going to work so well.
Yeah, you want to make sure you do your drone 9/11 first before someone else does it.
Well, it's basically like, it's extrapolated, but it's the same idea. Sort of like guy who runs like third tier budget flight school in South Florida. Like, our school's so good, you don't even need to learn how to land.
Yeah.
It does sort of change the nature. Well, it changed. Like, I think the point about this type of warfare and the sort of pursuit of autonomy is also one, like, it's deeply anti-human in the way that all of this really is. But it is one which is like, and again, like, to go back to the Palestine laboratory and all the stuff that we talked about Gaza, it's like, well, we've already sort of been conditioned, or like lots of people at least have been, the attempt to condition them to be like, yeah, civilian casualties number one aren't real, but also like, even if they are real, it's fine because that's just how war is now, right? Like, children die all the time, and, vulnerable people like die all the time, and but also everyone's a combatant. So like, they are like, I think like one of the sort of long-term effects of like what's happening in Gaza will be is that like the idea of like a civilian that is not engaged in combat and is therefore should be protected because they are not sort of like a combatant, that basically is gone. Right. Everyone in some form will sort of be defined as a combatant by enemy forces, like regardless of like their own positionality, whether they've picked up a gun, whether they've sort of like engaged in any violence at all. The second aspect of it is like, and my question more is like, okay, well, how the pursuit of autonomy also means like, how do you sort of define a war sort of being over? Like these instruments sort of feel like what they're perfect for is a sort of like state of perpetual war.
And both of those outcomes are tremendously desirable to, say, Andorel,
Yeah, if you are a traveling drone salesman who's going door to door and being like, hey, would you like to do your 9/11 before someone in Russia does it?
Now, I'm just a simple country 9/11 salesman.
Yeah. Now, I don't know if this town really is good enough for a 9/11. Seems like more of a fancy New Yorker thing.
Yeah, see, the guy who tried to sell 9/11 in 1993, he was liked, but he was not well liked.
But Muhammad Atta was not a famous man. His name was never in the paper.
Jesus
Tell me
Christ.
this 9/11.
That's right. That's correct.
I just think it's really funny how Seth MacFarlane in all of his shows always puts in so many show tunes. Like he just loves the 9/11 man.
So I read local news periodically, and like something that I've noticed is that it was pretty uncommon 15, 20 years ago to hear of like gang warfare, especially like drug gang warfare in Western Europe involving stuff like assault weapons, right? Like AK-47s or MP5s or Uzis. I mean, like that stuff existed. It was pretty uncommon, relatively speaking. I've heard of recent like gang shootouts happening in like right across the border from where I live in like Saint Julien and stuff like that, where people fled and left behind their whatever weapons, and they had AK-47s. And like, I'm not saying it's a one-to-one linkage here, but like when you've got no natural terrain features stopping, blocking you from an ongoing war zone where weapons are being dumped into it, those are going to get lost and spill out and enter the black market. And of course. And I think like in the incident in the Bataclan in Paris in 2015, I think it was later determined that a lot of those weapons had come in from Syria, for example. And so when you talk about this kind of a thing, like it only takes one of these things being, sold, filched for it to be a massive, massive risk, a massive problem. And also one thing I point out too is that look at how much everyone's like experience with traveling, everyone's experience of like getting around in the world got worse post 9/11, post 7/7, post like the fucking Atocha bombings, like all these things. Like, it used to not be common to go in train stations in Western Europe, for example, and see fucking like armed military or like massively armed police. Well, now it's everywhere.
By the same token, that Ukrainian guy who I was talking, his solution to this is, well, eventually, whether it's, before drone 9/11 or after drone 9/11, people are going to realize that the only thing to do is total AI-enabled surveillance of everyone all the time.
Well, but also, drone 9/11 happens. It could very easily also be accidental.
Yeah.
Well, this is the thing. Like, as you say, Nate, it's a huge kind of proliferation risk, right? And all of these guys absolutely want it to be, both on the basis that like they want these things to be accessible and like easy to use and easy to make and easy to sell, but also in order to sell your kind of like counter UAS stuff, right? In order to sell your surveillance system, and so like if you're one of the big players in this, if you're Andrew, you are making money off of both ends of this, right? Because you are selling the drones, you're selling the drone defenses, and you're like, well, not only am I the only person who can prevent drone 9/11, I'm also the only person who can allow you to do drone 9/11 to your enemies. And so this is kind of the desire, and as you mentioned, Hussein, this is kind of like international humanitarian law, the laws of war such as they are, right? Of having someone who is defined as a civilian, someone who is like hors de combat, like someone who is like permissible military target and someone who isn't, is very much a dead letter at this point. And this is like autonomous weapons. There is no international law about them. There is no convention on their use, but it kind of doesn't matter in the sense that, like, yes, it would be great if people got together and like passed a convention in the UN General Assembly about this, but they won't, because they're talking to Andrew et al. And also because there's this kind of general feeling, across like particularly NATO, of like, well, we are going to have to fight World War III sooner rather than later, and we are going to need all the help we can get because declining populations and all of this, and this is why the kind of like eastern border states of NATO have all withdrawn from the Ottawa Convention, which bans the use of like anti-personnel landmines, and that's why Finland is going back to making kind of conscripts just like carry a bunch of mines around in the woods. So there's really kind of no incentive for anyone who, and I think this is most people, does not want to get killed by an AI drone to sort of like there's no vote there, right?
Well, if you want to hear the most UN sentence ever, it's in the same article that we were reading. It says towards the end that to combat this threat, the UN has decided to move from discussions to negotiations.
Great, cool, fantastic.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
I mean, but also one thing I'd say too is the distribution of responsibility here, in the sense that like even if this is smoke and mirrors and ad copy, when you kind of create this notion, this argument that the targeting, the sort of pulling of the trigger is being done by a machine with autonomous decision making, then it's like, what are you gonna put the quadcopter in The Hague? Is it gonna fucking be like a frowny face quadcopter in the ICC? Like, you can effectively absolve humans of responsibility for it. And I'm not saying the technology would actually deliver that, but the line of argument, you can already see the alibi kind of getting assembled.
It's also like it's really beneficial to the ways in which AI fails, in the sense that like we know that AI hallucinates, we know that AI gets stuff wrong. The way in which you're deploying this, right, is if you're fighting your kind of like more conventional war, you say, okay, here is the front line as this box on the map, go in there and kill everybody wearing like a green uniform, right? It's gonna fuck up, but that's kind of like, it's not great, but you can work on that. If you're doing this for something other than that, if you're using this for like ethnic cleansing, right? If you go in and say, go into this, grid square and kill everyone of this ethnicity, right? You don't necessarily need that to be precise. And in some ways it's a benefit if it isn't, like a genocide doesn't operate successfully by being very, very precise at identifying who is in the targeted group. It works by like killing that many people that, okay, there's some people who you didn't want to kill. It doesn't matter, right? Like, in 1917, the Turks weren't going through being like, well, I am dead certain that this person is Armenian, right? It's because it's a sort of like it operates on a different level. It operates on a community and an ethnic level, right? And so this is going to do the same thing. And whether it's the kind of stochastic, whether it's like drone 9/11 or whatever, the ways in which AI gets things wrong, the ways in which AI fails and hallucinates, are all things that benefit that, and it's all kind of a feature rather than a bug. So saying that AI doesn't work, as we often do, it doesn't work as it's claimed to, in this case that makes me feel worse rather than better, if you follow me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because I mean, like, it's not that it's made like a fucked up Miyazaki style illustration of the Hamburglar. It's that like it's made a decision to fire a bullet or a 40 millimeter grenade or a Hellfire missile or whatever it is at something, or suicide drone something, and like all of that is taken out of the hands of any kind of like accountability.
And it's so sort of integrated into industry as well, where it's sort of, because like it's obviously like not to the same scale, but we see this like currently we're sort of seeing this in workplace environments where AIs like constantly fuck up when it comes to like recruitment, or it comes to internal processes of how companies work, and where that's sort of relinquished to AI, it's making mistakes all the time. And there are lots of stories of people who are just like, well, you know, you tell your boss that like something's sort of gone wrong, or the AI, like, you know, even in like things like, you know, sort of like tech and coding and everything, you'll tell your boss that like, or your line manager that, hey, like the code that the AI keeps kind of making me do is like wrong. And they'll say, yeah, but you still got to do it because like the AI has already been integrated. The company has sort of like restructured around the fact that this AI has been integrated. You have no choice but to sort of follow it. Now, like take that, you know, extend that logic to like warfare, but also just like the expanding security state and the fact that, yeah, it will constantly fuck up, and it will.
It's the missile gap. It's the missile gap again.
Yeah. It'll kill a lot of people, and it'll imprison a lot of people, and it'll make everyone's lives worse, but like particularly for like people whose lives are already shit. And what you'll be told is like, well, it's too late because, you know, that's just how we got to do.
I fucking hate it when AI enabled Grammarly declares it a free fire area.
So before we move on, I want to read one more quote from this article. This is another one of the like drone company owners. I have a suspicion that you've predicted which one I'm going to use. We didn't know that the Terminator was Ukrainian, Federation jokes, but maybe a Terminator situation is not the worst thing that can happen.
I feel like he hasn't seen the first Terminator, because I have. At the first Terminator, Arnold Schwarzenegger plays a Terminator, just like he does in Terminator 2, but he's not saving the tween boy protagonist. He's just fucking murdering people, sometimes naked, bursting through walls and shit.
How can you be safe in some city if someone tried to drone kill you? It's impossible. Okay, you could use some kind of jamming of radial connection, but they can still use some AI systems that know visually how you look and try to find you and kill you. So I don't think that the Terminator in that movie is the worst outcome. If this war never started, then we wouldn't have the type of weapon that is easy to buy and very easy to use. So yeah, he's like, look, you know what? Sometimes you just have to accept the little Terminator. I mean, someone else could just do it as a human.
Sometimes an Austrian bodybuilder will travel through time completely naked to whoop your ass, to shoot your roommate while she's getting nailed by her boyfriend, among other things. And that's just life.
I mean, the last sentence is right in as much as it is Russia's fault. As the kind of belligerent here for creating these conditions. Whether it would have happened anyway, I don't know. But I don't think that means that I have to be thrilled that in like a few years' time, I get to go outside, like open my front door, and a woman who looks exactly like me gets killed by a Hellfire missile across the street because somebody didn't like my posts. Like it's all of this is terrifying, and you should be terrified by this. And this is all downstream of whether it's Russia, whether it's Israel, whether it's the US sort of like bankrolling Israel, downstream of like a very conscious choice to just keep doing this forever, right? And this, I think you take that to the kind of right-wing fantasy, the camp of the saints thing, the idea that like, well, you know, we are going to be, you know, white genocided unless what we do is just do what Israel is doing now forever, and we make that easier and easier and easier. And the sort of like salutary lesson from Israel is that doesn't work. Like, you don't stay safe because there's always some kind of human ingenuity that will kind of like overcome that. You can't kind of keep like mowing the lawn forever, as Israel called its kind of like, you know, terror occupation of Gaza. And so ultimately this doesn't work either, but it is going to kind of kill a lot of people horribly in all of our futures, which I'm not thrilled about.
You know where we're going to see it next, in my view? It's not going to be in another battlefield. It's going to be, Anduril has said that what they want to do is this. They've built all of the infrastructure for this, because what Anduril has said is you don't need a wall, you have a virtual wall. The virtual wall is like constant AI-enabled drones doing recon, spotting people crossing the border, and then deploying ICE to go get them. It's like all you need to do is swap out that camera with a gun or a grenade, and then you have a totally autonomously militarized border wall that kills anybody it thinks is an illegal immigrant.
It's dangerously plausible, not just in the US as well. You look at like European border policy, or indeed British border policy. Now those are separate things.
The only thing that's keeping that from happening with British border policy is an unwillingness to invest in the drones, because we still think that maybe the volunteer border guards can do it. But if we wanted to talk about right-wing fantasies, though, I know we're going a little bit long, but I really felt we would be remiss if we did not talk about the world's least on drugs man getting, and I can't believe I'm going to say this phrase, dog walked by Ross Douthat. I can't, look, I'm surprised also.
So I feel like really quick thing before we go into the article, conscious of time. Ross Douthat is a New York Times columnist. He's the sort of like teary-eyed, scare quotes, good conservative who is always basically like, what if the bad thing was actually good, but actually like I don't support the vulgarity. Ross Douthat's whole story was he went to Harvard, of course, and wrote a book about like, against irony or whatever. My Harvard classmates are just everything is irony, everything is, and it's like I believe in sincerity, and like he has basically traversed the young conservative sphere to get to this point, and he's been at the Times for like well over a decade at this point. Like he's been around forever, and there was a time when he was just sort of treated as like a diversity hire, but like now the New York Times editorial board and its corporate owners, the family that owns it, got radicalized by the 2020 protests and decided that they fucking have to basically bring the world of children of men to America. So it's like it's rapidly becoming just the Times of London. And doubt that weirdly, like I think he actually believes the dumb bullshit that he says, which puts him in an interesting position in 2025 because he was and always has been opposed to, let's say, the lunatic fringe and the kind of like anti-human, anti-classical liberal, if you will, elements of Trumpism and like the American right and all of its antecedents.
Well, what I think is really funny about this, so I sum this up sort of similarly, but in a different way, is this is two guys who spend approximately the last third of a 45-minute interview scaring each other about the Antichrist, and somehow one of them wins.
Also, Peter Thiel looks like shit. Like
what do you
fucking
mean?
Shit, dude. All that money and all that, like, blood harvesting machines that the other weird billionaire does. That guy at least has, like, he looks like a jacked middle-aged guy in the same way that, like, Danny Elfman looks jacked as fuck, even though he's like 70. But Peter Thiel, he the best way I could describe seeing this interview, man, is he looks like he does believe in transhumanism. He's like, I want you to turn me into the cartoon lemur Timon from The Lion King.
Well, what he looks like to me is, because he is, okay, look, number one, he's on a lot of uppers, number one. Number two, he's dressing mostly monochromatically. He's speaking at you at great length. He is an older raver, I'm afraid. He is an older raver, and he is having a weird conversation with Ross here. So I want to read a little bit of it to give you the idea. Yes, it is two guys have a conversation about whether or not one of them is the Antichrist, and the one he asks is the Antichrist can't give a straight answer as to whether or not he's the Antichrist. Which you should be able to do. So I'm pulling a few snippets out here. Thiel says, "This is a conversation I had with Elon back in 2024. Imagine being a fly on the wall in that conversation. And we all had these conversations. I had the seasteading version with Elon where I said, if Trump doesn't win, I'm going to leave the country. Then Elon said there's nowhere to go. And then you always think the right arguments to make later. So 2 hours after.
I thought he was going to colonize Mars.
Well, is that he said, well, Peter Thiel said, wait a minute, Elon, but what about Mars? If you actually say there's nowhere to go, you don't believe in going to Mars anymore, because 2024 is the year where Elon stopped believing in Mars as a political project. It was supposed to be an alternative. And in 2024, I made Elon understand that if you went to Mars, the woke AI would follow you to Mars, as would the socialist US government.
Fucking go. I was wondering where to put my faith, and it's in two places: the woke US government and the woke AI.
Yeah, yeah. And so it's like, yeah. Oh, so he's just like, yeah, I'm afraid you have to abandon your dreams of going to Mars because it's not realistic. Perfect. Right there with you, Elon. But then it's like, because it's not realistic that you'll be able to escape the phantoms that you conjure for yourself.
Yeah, if you go to Mars, Rocco's gay basilisk is going to follow you.
It was at a meeting with Elon and the CEO of DeepMind, Demis Hassabis, that we brokered this.
I fucking know Demis Hassabis. He made a really good video game for a bit and then went to do this. Yeah. Wild.
So Demis said to Elon, I'm working on the most important project in the world. I'm building a superhuman AI. And Elon responds to Demis and says, well, I'm working on the most important project in the world, taking us to Mars. Demis said, well, my AI will follow you to Mars. And then Elon went quiet. This is like two kids being like, oh, yeah, well, I have lasers.
Well, my car can go 120 miles an hour.
I have lasers. Oh, yeah, well, I'm made of mirrors. So your laser bounces off and hits you, actually. And it says, It took years for that to hit Elon, and he didn't understand until 2024. The woke AI will follow you. The socialist government will follow you. And then maybe you have to do something other than just going to Mars. This is the tone and tenor of the conversation, right? Where this is not really Peter Thiel having some kind of meaningful discussion with Ross Douthat. Rather, it is Ross Douthat as a perfect empty vessel, allowing Peter Thiel to explain the strange, cracked out cosmology of the world that he inhabits. And unfortunately, to tie it back to the previous section, that's he is funding so many projects to beat the ghosts in his head.
It's right. Like all these guys think that taking these superhuman amounts of drugs can apparently make them achieve like ultra sentience, when it's like, no, you're just going to wind up like the Zappos guy. You're just going to like die in a house fire after like huffing fucking whipped cream, even though you're worth $1 billion. Like it's insane. But I don't know, man, like these are very unwell people. It's funny in a dark way, but like, unfortunately, they have enough money to buy up political projects and make everyone's lives worse.
Nate, thank you for accidentally plugging the most recent episode of No Gods, No Mayors, where we also talk about this guy. Later on, Douthat says, I think you'd prefer the human race to endure, right? Now, if you want, let's just say, all right.
It's what they call a softball question, famously because softball is insanely difficult to play.
Yeah, it's insanely difficult to play if you've done so much ketamine you've forgotten how to walk, and so many amphetamines that you've forgotten how to breathe.
That probably is true. Yeah.
So I bet. Okay, how about this? A different kind of Olympics, not the enhanced Olympics, the fucked up Olympics, where it's like you give all of the sprinters the same amount of like whatever Peter Thiel is on to see how far they get.
Or the world's toughest game of softball, where it's all women who could fucking bench press Peter Thiel and Ross Douthat in one, throwing the hardest fucking softball pitch that's completely within regs. And it's like these guys, I mean, it's just, I'm loving the idea that like they can't be normal. They under no circumstances. They have drugged themselves out of the ability to pretend to be normal.
I've talked before about how, like, at a certain point, there is a certain number of US dollars or purchasing power equivalent that you can have and have access to. There's a certain amount of power you can have that is not negotiated with anybody else, or is negotiated with such a small number of other people that insulates you so much that it has to be compared cognitively to getting kicked in the head repeatedly by a horse.
Yeah, it's like the money force field basically gives you the bends. Like your blood starts boiling from nitrogen and shit, and you just like it's so strange to watch.
So I'm just going to throw this out there. If I ask any of you three the question in a New York Times interview that was going to be seen by a lot of people, where your goal is to be like, I want people to understand what I'm thinking and begin to empathize with my beliefs so I can have more converts. And Ross Douthat, someone who desperately wants you to seem normal, says, you'd prefer the human race to endure, right? You wouldn't pause.
Right.
Yeah, big wink stomping on your foot. Like, here's where we coach you to say, yes, absolutely. And Thiel is like, yeah, I don't know.
I haven't an opinion.
Yeah. My lawyer has advised me I don't have to answer questions that may incriminate me. Yeah, Thiel says, Douthat, you're hesitating. Thiel, well, I don't know. I mean, I would. I would. You're still hesitating. Thiel, there's so many questions implicit in this. Douthat, should the human race survive? Thiel, yes. Douthat, okay. I finally got the answer out of you. I was looking. Perfect. We did 30 takes and that was the best one. Do you want the human race to endure?
I'd be in favor in a general sense, but like, you know.
Yeah. And also he's like, Pete Thiel also says, but I'd like us to radically solve these problems. Things like, you know, growing old, which is like, look, I don't just want to upload my consciousness to an AI. I want there to be immortality. I want it to be handed out by income. I want to be the emperor from 40K. And I swear to God, he already looks like the Emperor from 40K.
I was going to say, a large part of this is visual. Yeah. He looks so normal and trustworthy in this interview.
Yeah,
he's definitely not like a kind of every muscle in his head and neck kind of visibly tensing.
Yeah, it's like he looks like the Emperor from 40K at the time when 40K is set. If you're a 40K fan, you'll know what I'm talking about.
10,000 psychers a day sacrificed to Peter Thiel.
But I'd also like us to solve these problems. And so always, I don't know, yeah, I'm a transhumanist. The idea that was this radical transformation where your human natural body gets transformed into an immortal body. And then he was like, you know, I know obviously if you're going to be transgender, that's like why
of course,
bother?
It's different. It's
yeah,
different.
that's like, no, it's not big enough if you're going to be transgender. It's like, it's not a big enough deal. You should try to like replace your entire body. He's basically an Italian futurist. You should turn yourself into an immortal car rather than just be trans.
Do you imagine yourself as an immortal car?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I do, certainly.
I mean, shit, okay.
So then they have this discussion with the Antichrist, which I think is the pièce de résistance of this interview.
It's like that meme. I hate the Antichrist. I hate the Antichrist.
I hate the Antichrist so much.
Because Peter Thiel's whole deal is like eschatology for like Silicon Valley nerds, right? Like the woke AI and the socialist federal government are going to usher in the Antichrist. And so that's why we need to have like a king, and it has to be me, and it has to be forever.
Yeah, because you know who he proposes the alternative to him being king is? Any guesses as to who he proposes as the alternative? I don't think you're going to guess who it is.
Greta Thunberg.
Yep, there we go. Greta Thunberg. It's him or Greta.
I know that's intended to be like option that makes him seem very favorable, but it has just the opposite effect. I'm willing to do it. Maybe she can be the like benevolent philosopher king. Yeah, that's fine.
She could be the good Antichrist. Basically the idea presented here is that the Antichrist takes power over all the world. Because remember, these guys are both also incredibly Christian,
but in a deeply heterodox way as well.
Like they are incredibly Christian in a way that has been utterly filtered through the U.S. empire, right? They are Christian in the sense that actually what they're worshiping is like the state and capital.
And doubt that is too, but doubt that is like I oppose abortion, and I think if you have an abortion, you should feel bad about it, as opposed to like a Kevin Williamson who's like, if you have an abortion, the state should kill you. Yeah. So like doubt that Christianity is a thing he talks about a lot, but in Thiel's case, like it's like some kind of weird syncretic. It's basically like Silicon Valley guy on drugs, cow die.
I mean, I've seen. This is not my term. I'm taking it from Boltzmann Booty on Twitter, but this is, I think, quite perceptive. Look, this is just the world we live in. We have to cite people with fun. I love names.
Citations. Like I said, I absolutely. I think it's very important that we talk about the great thinkers of our age
who describe this as soy transhumanist right wing Christianity, and that's just it. Well, it's also like
it's also there's another Twitter thinker who I can't remember the name of this. Also, it's two dumb bitches telling each other exactly.
The idea is right that the Antichrist gathers all things under them and then administers a lack of freedom. Right? It's like the Antichrist as how you would have imagined the Soviet Union to be in 1976. Right? It's one world government. It's LaRoucheism. It's Bircherism. Right, is that the Antichrist is going to not be a wizard of technology. This is what Doubthat says. I want to suggest a middle ground between these two options. One of them being, the Antichrist is this charismatic, powerful figure, or the Antichrist is a sort of quite sweet-seeming person who just wants to make life better for everybody, but you have to give them control. Eco-Antichrist. I says it used to be the reasonable fear of the Antichrist. So I just love that. The reasonable fear for the Antichrist was as a kind of technological wizard. And now the reasonable fear is someone who promises to control technology, make it safe, and usher in universal stagnation. Thiel says that's more my description of how it would happen. I think people still have the fear of a 17th century Antichrist. We're still scared of Dr. Strangelove. Doubt that. But you're saying the real Antichrist would play on that fear and say, you must come with me to avoid Skynet, avoid the Terminator, and avoid nuclear Armageddon. So basically, all of what we just said earlier about this prospect of a proliferation of fully autonomous drones killing people on the basis of whatever tech guys think or whatever like particular armies say, whatever, that makes us supportive of the Antichrist. That the reasonable fear of the Antichrist is one of us.
It also throws in a different dimension if you follow the logic from the previous quote in that article that the Antichrist or the Terminator is by definition Ukrainian. So is the Antichrist, I guess.
You finally make it to Mars, you're free of woke, and then the Ukrainian Terminator lands.
Yeah, exactly.
Ukrainian Terminator lands. It is just like, give me pronoun.
He extirpates all of your medical staff, and it's like, no, you only medicine is in the banya. You are going to get hit in the ass with a birch branch, and that will heal all your ills.
Yeah, it's banya and soup. Look, we're going long, but I have one more little bit, which is Thiel's version of history. It's a bit of a sort of Whig theory of history, but that centers on Woodstock in 1969. He says, my telling of the history is that in the 1970s, the hippies won. We landed on the moon in July of 69. Woodstock started 3 weeks later. With the benefit of hindsight, that's when progress stopped and the hippies won. And so we have environmentalism, pro-stagnation, and so on. Again, like, you don't want to just be like, Peter Thiel, here's where you're wrong. But it's like, it's not like Woodstock happened and then everyone decided to stop building stuff. It's that Woodstock happened and then the 6-day war happened and then OPEC restricted the supply of oil and then there was an energy price shock that created the financialization of everything.
Also, I would say too that like the hippies themselves said they didn't win, and a lot of people who are adjacent to it said they didn't win, because Nixon won in 1968 and then expanded the war to Cambodia in 1970 and then won again in 1972 by a massive margin. So like, you know, that reaction in America, which my argument has always been that like it is just white America reacting to the civil rights movement. But like, the hippies didn't win. The idea that you can point to the hippies and say they won is it's like, because we have fucking Earth Day. It's like, cool, man. Like, any other things happened since then?
The hippies won because some of their ideas are still popular among people who have cultural power exclusively.
Yes, people in Cleveland did not like the Cuyahoga River catching on fire, even if they vote Republican. And nobody who has anything serious to say about, let's say, contemporary American history would derive that conclusion.
Would be like, oh, Woodstock. It all changed at Woodstock. I think it all changed at Woodstock 99. Actually.
Well, exactly, yeah, because Limp Bizkit told people to tear shit up and give me something to break, and yeah, I mean, no, it actually all changed at Altamont, I guess. I mean, because it's a vision for policing of the future.
Yeah. Anyway, that is the Teal Doubthat interview. There's a lot there, but I wanted to pick a few highlights. Plus, we are running very long anyway, so I think that's all we've got for today. But number one, I want to thank you all for listening, as ever. Number two, there is a Patreon. As per usual, there will be an episode on that Patreon later this week. November and I are now reading the next Aubrey Maturin novel, so look out for that.
Desolation Island should be a fun time.
I've started. It's so good. It's so awesome already. I'm loving it. And also, I said this on a bonus episode, but I wanted to say it on a free episode as well. And now the poll is actually going to be published. We are considering coming to Canada. If you are living in the United States, you need to tell us, and you have to actually really, for real, be honest, if you would actually travel to come see us in one of the cities of Vancouver, Toronto, or Montreal, because that will help us find appropriately sized venues. Please do not tick unless you really mean to attend. Think about the costs involved in doing so, because we will be making a financial decision based on the information you provide. So, there's all of that. Milo Edwards is variously around, his website. You can check him out wherever he might be. Right now, he's getting precision bombed at Glastonbury. Yeah. So I think with all that being said, we will see you on the Patreon episode on Thursday. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.